cold wind swept across the auction house, biting into Sophie's skin as her father's voice rang out over the crowd. "Sold!" he bellowed, his words dripping with disdain. Sophie's heart stopped as the crowd erupted in laughter, the harsh sting of humiliation cutting deep. In that moment, everything about her, her worth, her dignity, and her future was auctioned off to the highest bidder. She wasn't just sold for money. She was sold for being nothing more than a failure, an infertile woman who would never bear children. Her world had turned black. The pain was so intense, so suffocating, that Sophie felt as though she might collapse right there in front of everyone. Her father stood proudly, seemingly oblivious to the destruction he was causing. But then, a deep, soothing voice cut through the chaos. "I'll pay $15,000, a man said, stepping forward. The crowd fell silent as the man's words hung in the air. Sophie's eyes flickered up, locking onto the stranger who had made the bid. His face was kind but determined, and in his eyes there was something she hadn't seen in a long time: compassion. This wasn't just some man looking to buy her out of pity. He wasn't a part of the cruel spectacle her father had made of her life. No, this man, he was different. And with that, Sophie's life was about to change forever. Hello, family, and welcome to Fiction Stories TV. If you love deeply emotional stories about love, loss, and unexpected reunions, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with someone you care about. Don't forget to turn on your notifications so you never miss a new story from us. Your support truly means everything. Now, sit back, relax, and let's dive in. The man who had saved her, Nathan Cole, was a philanthropist, a billionaire, and yet there was a deep sadness in his eyes that told Sophie he was no stranger to loss. She didn't know what to make of him at first. How could a man like him be interested in a woman like her? But the look on his face, the quiet resolve, the compassion, was enough to quiet her racing thoughts. He didn't speak much as they left the auction house. The ride to his ranch, Hollow Hills Ranch, was long and silent, but Sophie felt the tension in the air. She wasn't sure whether to be grateful or suspicious. Was he rescuing her out of kindness, or was he simply using his money to buy something, someone he could control? Her heart still ached from the humiliation, and trust was something she hadn't known for a long time. When they finally arrived, the first thing Sophie noticed was the vastness of the ranch. It was a peaceful place, far from the cruel eyes of the world. The rolling hills stretched out in every direction, and the mountains loomed in the distance, shrouded in mist. There was a garden just outside the house, its flowers wild and untended, a symbol of the woman who had once tended to them, Nathan's late wife, Eliza. Sophie was told she would be working on the garden, restoring it to its former beauty, a task that was both daunting and strangely healing. It wasn't just about the garden, though. It was about giving Sophie a place to heal, a place to start over. The first few days at the ranch were difficult. Sophie was overwhelmed by the change, the silence, the emptiness of her own heart. But little by little, she began to connect with the land. She found solace in the routine of gardening, in the quiet companionship of the animals, and in the stories Nathan would share about Eliza. "I remember when she first planted these roses," Nathan said one evening as he sat next to her by the garden. She said the blooms reminded her of the strength of the human spirit, how something so delicate could survive even the harshest conditions. Sophie looked down at the roses, their petals soft and vibrant against the fading light of the day. She felt a stirring in her chest, a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, she could heal too. It wasn't easy, though. Every time she touched the soil, memories of her father's cruelty crept back into her mind. The words he had spoken to her, the judgment he had placed on her life, they lingered in her thoughts like a heavy weight. But the more time she spent at Hollow Hills, the more Sophie began to feel a shift. She wasn't just mending the garden, she was mending herself. Then, just as Sophie began to feel a flicker of peace, something unexpected happened. She collapsed while working in the garden. At first, it seemed like nothing more than exhaustion. But when she woke up in a hospital bed, surrounded by medical equipment, the doctors revealed something that left her stunned. "Sophie," the doctor said, "you're pregnant." The world seemed to stop. Sophie's breath caught in her throat as her mind raced. It couldn't be possible. She had been told time and time again that she couldn't conceive. Infertility had defined her life for as long as she could remember. How could this be happening? Nathan, who had been by her side the entire time, watched her with a mix of concern and disbelief. He didn't speak at first, allowing her the space to process the news. But when Sophie finally looked up at him, the tears in her eyes were a mixture of joy and confusion. "How is this even possible?" she whispered. "I don't know," Nathan said, his voice soft. "But it's a miracle, Sophie." And for the first time in a long time, Sophie allowed herself to believe in that possibility. A miracle. Her heart pounded in her chest as the reality of what was happening began to settle in. This wasn't just a second chance at motherhood. It was a second chance at life. She didn't know how to feel about this new chapter, this new possibility. It was both terrifying and beautiful, a mix of emotions that left her breathless. But with the pregnancy came challenges. As news of Sophie's pregnancy spread, so did the gossip. The media came knocking, and the town began to buzz with rumors. Was this some sort of publicity stunt? Was Nathan taking advantage of Sophie? The pressure was mounting, and Sophie felt herself slipping, unsure of what to do or how to handle the scrutiny. Nathan, too, struggled. His own grief over Eliza's death hadn't fully healed, and now, with Sophie pregnant, he was forced to confront his feelings of guilt and uncertainty. Was he ready to love again? Could he? Or was he simply trying to fill the void left by his late wife with someone new? As the pressure from the media and Nathan's board of trustees intensified, Sophie felt more isolated than ever. Her father's shadow loomed over her, threatening to undo all the progress she had made. And with the complications of her pregnancy, the fear of losing the child she had been told she could never have, Sophie found herself trapped between two worlds, one full of hope, the other steeped in doubt. Would she find a way to overcome the struggles that lay ahead? Would Nathan's love be enough to see them through? Sophie didn't know the answers yet. But one thing was certain, her life was about to change forever. The days that followed Sophie's discovery of her pregnancy were a whirlwind of emotions. At first, it seemed like a dream, something so impossible that it couldn't be real. But the truth sat heavily in her chest, a constant reminder of the miracle that was growing inside of her. Each morning, as she woke in her room at Hollow Hills Ranch, Sophie couldn't help but trace her fingers over her stomach, trying to connect with the life that had taken root against all odds. Nathan was kind, but there was an air of uncertainty around him. He still carried the weight of Eliza's death, and Sophie could see it in his eyes when he looked at her. It wasn't just about the pregnancy. It was about moving on, about learning to love again, and Sophie knew that was something neither of them was ready to face just yet. They spent their days in the garden, Sophie working on restoring it to its former glory. She began to understand why Nathan had brought her here, not just for her own healing, but for the garden, too. As each flower bloomed, each tree grew stronger, Sophie felt herself becoming something she never thought possible, a woman who had hope, who believed in the possibility of joy. But then the storm came. Not a storm of rain and wind, but a storm of judgment and scrutiny. The media descended on Hollow Hills Ranch like vultures, their cameras and questions relentless. The story of Sophie's auction and miraculous pregnancy became national news, and the headlines painted her as either a saint or a scandal. "Billionaire saves infertile woman," one headline read. Another, "Is it love or just charity? The truth about Nathan Cole and Sophie Ellis." Nathan's business partners, too, were less than pleased. The charity board, which had been Nathan's pride and joy, saw the headlines as a threat to their reputation. They feared that Sophie's story would overshadow the good work they had done. Sophie watched as Nathan's stress mounted. The man who had been her rock, the man who had offered her sanctuary, was now drowning in the weight of public opinion. One evening, as they sat in the drawing room, the tension was unbearable. The quiet crackle of the fire was the only sound that filled the room, and Sophie felt the heat on her face, but it did nothing to warm her heart. She could feel Nathan's eyes on her, his worry palpable. "I don't know what to do, Sophie," he said quietly, breaking the silence. "The board wants me to distance myself from you. They're worried about the scandal, about the money, about the media." Sophie's stomach churned at his words. "And what do you want to do, Nathan?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Do you want to distance yourself from me?" Nathan was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. Sophie couldn't tell if he was thinking of Eliza, of the life they had shared, or if he was questioning whether he was making the right decision. Finally, he turned to face her. "I don't know," he admitted. "I love you, Sophie, but I also don't want to hurt you. This situation is more complicated than I ever imagined." Sophie's heart broke at his words. She had never wanted to cause him pain. She had never asked for any of this. But she had come to care for him in a way she hadn't thought possible, and the idea of losing him, the one person who had shown her what love and kindness truly were, was unbearable. "I don't need your charity, Nathan," Sophie whispered. "I don't need the media to tell me who I am, and I don't need your pity. I just need you to be honest with me. Tell me what you want, and I'll follow." The rawness of her words hung in the air, and Nathan's face softened. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her skin in a gesture of comfort. "I want to protect you, Sophie," he said, "but I also want to be with you. I want to build something with you, even if it means facing the world together. But I need to know if you're willing to face the consequences with me." Sophie's heart swelled at his confession, and for the first time she felt the stirrings of something stronger than fear, something that felt like love. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but she knew one thing: they would face it together. The next few days were a blur of decisions. Sophie tried to shield herself from the barrage of media questions, retreating to the safety of the ranch whenever she could. Nathan, on the other hand, continued to juggle the pressures of his charity and the increasing scrutiny over his relationship with Sophie. But no matter how difficult things became, they never stopped working on the garden. The day the snowstorm arrived, Sophie had no idea that it would be the most pivotal moment in her life. She was in the middle of pruning the rose bushes when she felt a sudden wave of dizziness. She reached for the nearest tree to steady herself, but her vision blurred, and before she could take another step, everything went black. When she woke, she was in the local clinic, the smell of antiseptic filling her nostrils. Nathan was by her side, his hand wrapped around hers, his expression tight with worry. "You passed out," Nathan said softly. "The doctor said you need to rest. You've been pushing yourself too hard." Sophie blinked, trying to piece together the events. "The baby?" she asked, her voice weak. Nathan's eyes softened. "The baby's fine," he reassured her. "But you're not out of the woods yet. The doctor says you're at risk for premature labor. We need to take it easy from here on out." The news hit Sophie like a ton of bricks. The thought of losing the baby, of losing everything she had fought for, was too much to bear. But Nathan's presence was a calming force, and as the storm raged outside, she felt the warmth of his hand in hers, offering her a sense of peace she hadn't known she needed. Just then, a new wave of pain swept through her, and Sophie gasped, clutching Nathan's hand tightly. The storm outside raged even harder, but inside, Sophie felt herself spiraling. Could she survive this? Could she bring this miracle into the world? Nathan's face was filled with concern, but his voice was steady. "Hold on, Sophie. I'm here. We're going to get through this together." The pain came in waves, sharp and unrelenting, each one more intense than the last. Sophie gripped Nathan's hand as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. The clinic room was cold, and the sound of the storm outside seemed to mirror the storm raging inside her. She was terrified. Terrified for herself, terrified for the baby she had only just begun to believe in. Nathan's voice was a steady anchor in the chaos. "Breathe, Sophie," he said softly, his thumb gently rubbing the back of her hand. "Stay with me. We'll get through this. Just focus on your breathing." But the pain was all-consuming, and Sophie could barely hear him over the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She had never imagined her life would come to this. A hospital room, a pregnancy she wasn't sure would make it to term, and a future that felt so uncertain. As the hours stretched on, Sophie's mind began to wander. She thought of her father, of the way he had auctioned her off, as if she were no more than a piece of property. She thought of how, for so long, she had believed those words, that she was worthless, that she was nothing more than an infertile woman who had nothing to offer. But then Nathan had come into her life, offering kindness when she hadn't known it existed, offering hope when she had lost all faith. And now, as she lay in that clinic room, holding on to him for dear life, she realized something. She was no longer the broken woman her father had made her out to be. She was stronger than she had ever known. She was fighting for this child, for her future, and for the love that had blossomed between her and Nathan. Suddenly, a contraction hit harder than before, and Sophie gasped, clutching the sheets beneath her. Her breathing quickened, and her vision blurred as the pain surged through her body. "Nathan," she cried out, her voice raw with desperation. "I'm here, Sophie," Nathan said, his voice strained but firm. "I'm right here, I'm not going anywhere." He had been there for her through it all, through the auction, through the media scrutiny, through the doubts and fears that had plagued her since the moment they met. And now, in this moment, as the storm raged outside and the storm within her intensified, Sophie knew that Nathan wasn't going to leave her. Not now. Not ever. As the contraction subsided, Sophie collapsed back onto the bed, exhausted and trembling. Nathan wiped the sweat from her forehead, his face etched with concern. "I'm scared," Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know," Nathan replied, his thumb brushing her cheek. "But we'll get through this, Sophie, together." The doctor entered the room then, her face serious but calm. "We need to get you to a larger hospital, Sophie. You're in premature labor, and we need to monitor you more closely. We're going to transfer you now." Sophie's heart skipped a beat at the mention of early labor. She wasn't ready. She wasn't ready for this baby to come into the world yet. She wasn't ready to face the risks, to face the unknown. But there was no time for hesitation. There was only time to act. Nathan's hand never left hers as they moved her to the waiting transport. The snowstorm outside had grown fiercer, but Nathan's presence beside her gave Sophie the strength to hold on, to trust that she would make it through this. The drive to the hospital was a blur. The snowstorm made it nearly impossible to see the road ahead, but Nathan didn't falter. He drove with a determination that Sophie couldn't help but admire. She had never seen him so focused, so resolute. And in that moment, she knew that he would do anything to protect her and their baby. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they arrived at the hospital. Nurses and doctors rushed to her side, preparing her for delivery. Sophie's mind was foggy with exhaustion, her body screaming in pain with every contraction, but Nathan was there, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement. "Everything will be okay," he promised, his voice a lifeline in the midst of the chaos. "I'm not going anywhere." Sophie wanted to believe him, but the fear was overwhelming. What if the baby didn't make it? What if she couldn't survive this? She couldn't lose this miracle, this little life that had defied the odds. After hours of labor, the moment came. Sophie gritted her teeth against the pain as the doctor told her it was time to push. Nathan's hand tightened around hers, his face a mixture of worry and awe. He had never seen Sophie in this light, never seen her so vulnerable, so fragile. And yet, in that moment, he saw the strength in her that he had always known was there. With one final push, Sophie gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, a healthy baby girl. The moment she heard her daughter's cry, Sophie's heart surged with relief and love. The room seemed to quiet, and for a fleeting moment, Sophie felt as if time had stopped. She had done it. Against all odds, she had brought a new life into the world. Nathan's eyes were filled with tears as he looked at their daughter. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Sophie looked down at the baby in her arms, her tiny hands wrapped around her finger. "Hope," Sophie whispered. "Her name is Hope, Hope Eliza." Nathan kissed her forehead gently. "Hope Eliza," he repeated, his voice soft. "She's our miracle." Sophie smiled, tears streaming down her face. She had never believed in miracles before. But now, holding her daughter in her arms, she realized that miracles did happen. Sometimes they came when you least expected them, when you had lost all hope. And for the first time in a long time, Sophie felt a peace settle over her heart. But even in this moment of triumph, there was still the question that lingered between them. What would their future hold? The world was still watching, still waiting for them to fail, still judging them for their past. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Sophie knew one thing for sure: she and Nathan had already overcome so much together. They had fought through the worst of it, and they would continue to fight for their future, for their love, and for their daughter. "Whatever happens," Sophie said, her voice steady and full of conviction, "we'll face it together." Nathan smiled, his eyes never leaving their daughter. "Together," he echoed. The days that followed Sophie's labor were a blur of exhaustion, joy, and the undeniable feeling of transformation. She held her daughter, Hope Eliza, close to her chest, and for the first time in a long while, she felt whole. Nathan was by her side every step of the way, helping with the baby, making sure Sophie had everything she needed, and constantly reassuring her that she had done something extraordinary. But despite the overwhelming joy that surrounded them, the world outside their little bubble of peace was still watching. The media hadn't let up, and the headlines about Sophie's miraculous pregnancy, her rescue from the auction, and Nathan's involvement had only intensified. Sophie tried to shut it all out, focusing on her daughter and the love that had blossomed between her and Nathan. But there were moments when the weight of public scrutiny became too much to bear. She could feel the eyes of judgment on her every time she stepped outside the house, every time she held Hope in her arms. The whispers were there, soft but constant, a reminder of the way she had been viewed as less than human not long ago. One afternoon, as Sophie sat on the porch, rocking Hope gently in her arms, Nathan joined her. His presence was always a comfort, a reminder that no matter what the world said, they had each other. He sat beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice soft but filled with concern. Sophie sighed, looking out at the sprawling hills of the ranch. The wind blew gently, carrying the scent of pine and earth. It was peaceful here, but even in this tranquil setting, Sophie couldn't escape the noise in her mind. "I'm trying," she said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "But the world won't stop watching Nathan. No matter what we do, they'll always see me as the woman who was auctioned off, the woman who was worthless." Nathan's eyes softened as he turned to face her. "You're not worthless, Sophie, you never were, and neither is Hope. She's a miracle, she's our miracle." Sophie smiled faintly, brushing away a tear that threatened to fall. "I know, but it's hard, Nathan. I've spent so long thinking I was nothing, thinking I had nothing to offer anyone. And now, even with everything that's happened, everything that's changed, I still feel like I'm being judged, like I'm still that woman who was auctioned off." Nathan reached over and took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "You're not that woman anymore. You're a mother, Sophie, you're a fighter. And you've built something beautiful here, a family, a life. The past doesn't define you, and it certainly doesn't define Hope." Sophie nodded, her heart swelling with love for the man beside her. She had never expected her life to take this turn. She had never expected to find someone like Nathan, a man who saw her for who she truly was, not for the labels that had been placed on her. And she had certainly never imagined that she would be holding their miracle child in her arms. "I just want to be enough," Sophie whispered. "For you, for Hope, for myself." "You are," Nathan said, his voice filled with certainty. "You're more than enough." And in that moment, Sophie realized that he was right. She didn't need to prove anything to the world. She didn't need to validate her worth with anyone else's approval. She had already built something incredible, a love, a family, and a future. That was enough. The weeks passed, and life at Hollow Hills Ranch began to settle into a new rhythm. The media frenzy eventually died down, as all things do, and Sophie and Nathan found themselves free to live their lives without the constant scrutiny of the outside world. The ranch became their sanctuary, a place where they could grow and heal together. As Sophie spent more time in the garden, she found herself reflecting on everything she had been through. The pain, the rejection, the sense of worthlessness, it all seemed so distant now. The woman who had been auctioned off was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who had fought for love, for family, and for herself. She looked down at Hope, who was now a few months old, her little hands reaching up toward the sky as if she, too, were ready to embrace the world. Sophie smiled, her heart full. This was the life she had always dreamed of, a life filled with love, with hope, and with a future that seemed brighter than ever before. One day, as Sophie and Nathan sat together in the restored chapel on the ranch, the place where they had spent so many quiet moments together, Nathan took her hand in his. The chapel, once a place of grief and loss for him, had become a symbol of their healing, a symbol of everything they had overcome. "Sophie," Nathan said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I know it hasn't been easy. The past few months have been a whirlwind and we've faced so much. But I'm asking you now, in this place that's meant so much to me. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife?" Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes as she looked at him, her heart swelling with love. She had never imagined a moment like this, never imagined that someone like Nathan would want her to be his forever. But here they were, standing in this beautiful chapel, their daughter in the other room, and the future ahead of them. "Yes," Sophie whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Nathan, I'll marry you, I'll be your wife." And just like that, everything they had fought for, everything they had endured, was leading them to this moment. A future built on love, trust, and the hope that had brought them together in the first place. As they stood together in the chapel, surrounded by the beauty of their restored life, Sophie knew that the road ahead wouldn't be without challenges. But it didn't matter, because they had each other, and they had hope. They had everything they needed. The story of Sophie and Nathan, once marked by pain and uncertainty, had transformed into one of love, healing, and redemption. They had faced the worst of what life had thrown at them and emerged stronger on the other side. Their journey wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving, about building something beautiful out of the ashes of their past. As they stood together, ready to begin the next chapter of their lives, Sophie couldn't help but smile. Life had a way of surprising you, of giving you the most unexpected miracles when you least expected them. And as she looked at Nathan, she knew one thing for sure: no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Forever.